The morning of the IPO was supposed to be the crowning moment of our company's ascent. Journalists hovered near the entrance. Cameras were placed with surgical precision, and every executive rehearsed sound bites meant to echo through financial networks. The boardroom buzzed with rehearsed excitement, but beneath the surface, anxiety simmered. An IPO isn't a celebration. It's an autopsy performed on a company's past decisions, every line item laid bare for the world to scrutinize. Still, no one was prepared for what happened next. The glass doors opened, and silence sliced through the chatter. She didn't enter like a visitor. She arrived like an era. Victoria Hale. No badge. No credentials. Just diamonds that caught the ceiling lights as though they were designed for her entrance alone. Her heels didn't click, they declared. She bypassed executives who had bled for this moment, ignored analysts clutching financial briefs, and walked straight to the chairman's seat, lowering herself into it with the entitlement of someone convinced gravity existed to serve her. Victoria wasn't an employee. She never attended a single meeting, never reviewed a quarterly projection, never contributed an hour of sweat or thought to the architecture that built this company. Yet her name appeared on merger documents she had supposedly negotiated. Share allocations bore her signature in strokes too identical to be genuine. Her voting power dwarfed those who had spent years crafting the product that brought us to valuation. She didn't build the software. She didn't shepherd the teams. She didn't even understand the fundamentals of the business. But she sat in the seat reserved for someone who did. To the untrained eye, her presence suggested royalty, stability, legacy, heritage. But that veneer cracked the moment the lights flipped on for the live broadcast. Applause softened. Eyes darted. People wondered, silently but urgently, why a retired socialite was poised to control the destiny of a tech enterprise. That was when I realized the truth behind the spectacle. This IPO wasn't about celebrating innovation. It was about cementing inheritance. Victoria wasn't there to participate. She was there to consecrate. To ensure the Hale name remained woven into the foundation of something she never earned. They believed her influence was untouchable. They didn't know I had spent 9 months preparing a legal scalpel, forged from filings they hoped no one would ever read. The world gathered to witness her legacy. I came to dismantle it. It began the way most corporate irregularities do, not with alarms, but with whispers. One afternoon, my boss mentioned, almost dismissively, that his mother would assist with governance. No explanation. No documentation. No formal announcement. The comment seemed harmless, insignificant, the kind of administrative detail most people shrug off. But what followed was anything but harmless. Meetings I once led were suddenly rerouted. Department heads who never answered to anyone outside the C-suite began pausing mid-sentence and saying, "Victoria needs to approve this." Victoria, whose office nobody had seen. Victoria, whose role nobody could define. Victoria, who did not exist on any organizational chart. Slowly, authority began shifting away from operational logic and toward a name that carried weight without presence. Budget approvals altered overnight. Entire teams evaporated without cause. The head of compliance resigned quietly, leaving behind a single line in his exit memo. Good luck. HR became an instrument of silence, issuing vague terminations and new reporting structures that answered somewhere above the CEO, but nowhere visible. It felt less like a business and more like a castle, one in which the queen never appeared, yet her shadow ruled every hallway. What first seemed odd became chilling the day I reviewed archival board summaries. There, buried in a mix of routine approvals, sat a signature that didn't belong. Victoria Hale's, dated weeks before the very meeting where she was supposedly introduced to leadership. Which meant one thing. She hadn't joined the company. She had been embedded into it. Curiosity turned to alarm when I pulled up shareholder records. Victoria had no LinkedIn profile, no professional history, no public investment trail, nothing. In a world where even interns leave digital fingerprints, she was a ghost. Yet every quarter, her stake grew. 10%, 14, 19. It was a rise that didn't align with capital contributions, performance awards, or governance votes. Someone wasn't investing money into the company. Someone was extracting ownership out of it. The math didn't make sense unless one accepted the most disturbing possibility. Shares were moving, not because they were earned, but because someone wanted a silent monarch sitting behind the corporate throne. By then, it was no longer an oddity. It was a pattern, and patterns are the beginning of proof. Most people treat onboarding paperwork like a formality. They skim, initial, sign, and move on, trusting that someone else has already ensured legality. I never trusted assumptions. I believed the real power of an organization wasn't spoken aloud in meetings. It was hidden in clauses no one bothered to read. So, while others celebrated promotions and stock options, I dissected the foundation we all stood on. That habit, once mocked as paranoia, became the key that unlocked everything. Clause September 17th Saturday buried near the end of a stack of documents no human resources intern would ever revisit. It was written in language designed to bore the impatient. Legal phrasing, nested conditions, footnotes referencing subsidiary contracts. Yet its message was surgical in its simplicity. Any shareholder granted voting rights had 120 days to prove capital input, real, traceable financial contribution, or their shares were automatically voided. No exceptions. No extensions. No grace period. It was a poison pill built decades earlier to prevent exactly one thing: fabricated ownership. Nobody enforced it because no one expected anyone to be audacious enough to exploit the company's ignorance. Until Victoria Hale appeared. She had no investment trail, no wire transfers, no vesting schedule, no proof she had contributed a single dollar toward her growing power. Her ownership existed only through signatures, approvals, and internal adjustments, none tied to actual capital. It wasn't a stake. It was smoke. Her son, blinded by entitlement, assumed that as long as he logged the transactions internally, no one would challenge them. He didn't realize the law didn't care who his mother was, how expensive her jewelry looked, or how loudly he insisted she belonged. What he created wasn't legacy. It was fraud wrapped in sentiment. The discovery wasn't dramatic. It happened late at night, fluorescent lights buzzing above me as I cross-checked equity allocation logs. Numbers didn't add up. Dates contradicted announcements. And then, the realization hit with the clarity of a hammer. Victoria Hale wasn't a shareholder. She was a legal ghost. A shareholder without proof is not a shareholder. Clause 17.9 didn't request evidence. It demanded it. Her son assumed the IPO would crown a dynasty. Instead, he had built an empire on a ticking countdown. Diamonds endure scrutiny. Dust masquerading as diamonds never survives pressure. This wasn't pressure. It was the beginning of collapse. I didn't storm into offices demanding explanations, nor did I threaten anyone with revelations. Rage is loud, and loud things draw attention. I preferred stillness, the kind of silence that lets people reveal themselves without knowing they're being watched. Victoria Hale believed she was untouchable, that authority was a costume she could slip into whenever she pleased. She never imagined someone like me, someone who read the fine print, traced signatures, and remembered dates, would be the one to notice the cracks in her crown. My first clue arrived through a sequence of emails forwarded by accident. They referenced decisions attributed to Victoria, approvals, directives, and financial reallocations, yet she held no formal operational role. Her name appeared beside budget approvals despite never attending financial reviews. She greenlit vendor contracts without credentials. She granted stock incentives without authorization. None of these actions were supported by board motions or charter amendments. Decisions that once required democratic consensus now moved at the whim of an unseen monarch. It was the corporate version of divine right, no logic, no vote, just decree. I began archiving every inconsistency. Not screenshots. Not selective clips. Entire threads. Each email was a puzzle piece, and with every piece I collected, the image sharpened. I traced changes in departmental budgets and found approvals signed digitally at odd hours, midnight, 2 a.m., 3:17 a.m., times when legitimate governance slept. These weren't mistakes. They were deliberate manipulations masked as routine operational updates. Approvals that once required multiple signatures now passed through a singular gateway, Victoria's invisible authority. Then I found something worse: contracts altered after board execution. The dates remained unchanged, but clauses shifted, royalty percentages adjusted, licensing rights redirected. And at the bottom of every modified contract, her son's name, my boss, appeared as the digital author of revisions he had no right to make. He wasn't just bending rules. He was editing history. I could have stopped there, but instincts told me this was only the surface. People who steal power don't stop at taking control. They try to erase the proof of how they did it. My suspicion became confirmation the day I intercepted an internal message accidentally copied to me, an encrypted request from Victoria to legal counsel. The subject line was 3 words long: clean the record. The body of the message was worse. She instructed counsel to remove any documentation linking share allocations to her son, including initial filings, transfer approvals, and vesting logs. She didn't want authority. She wanted absolution. She wasn't building a future. She was laundering a past. What chilled me wasn't the audacity of the request. It was how normal the legal team treated it. No questions. No hesitation. Just compliance. They responded with timelines for data removal, server wipes, and document redaction. It was a machine built for erasure, and it had been running long before I discovered it. That was when I realized something essential. Evidence stored on company servers wasn't evidence at all. It was hostage to the very people trying to bury it. If I left anything inside that infrastructure, it would vanish, replaced by sanitized narratives and forged compliance logs. I needed my own sanctuary. So I moved everything: emails, contracts, metadata, authorization chains, timestamps, to an encrypted external repository registered under my name, protected by a patent clock, an off-site ledger, and legal redundancy. Not even a court order could wipe what I had once it was filed. They could burn the offices to the ground and still fail to erase what I knew. As I continued gathering proof, I uncovered patterns that went beyond Victoria. Executives once considered loyal had been slowly replaced. Roles changed. Job descriptions rewritten. Department heads removed under vague allegations of misalignment. They weren't incompetent. They were obstacles. The company wasn't being managed. It was being prepared, sanitized for dynastic transfer. The truth was undeniable. Innovation wasn't the business model anymore. Legacy was. The software we built, the technology we pioneered, the valuation we chased, all of it was scaffolding for a kingdom she wanted to hand her son without scrutiny. We weren't a tech firm. We were a coronation ceremony disguised as commerce. Victoria Hale didn't want power documented. She wanted power assumed. She didn't want a seat at the table. She wanted the table built around her. What she never understood was that legacy isn't created through inheritance. It is preserved through integrity. And integrity, once violated, becomes evidence. She spent months burying tracks. I spent 9 months excavating them. She trusted silence. I trusted paper. And paper, unlike people, never lies. Corruption has a scent. It lingers in boardrooms long before scandals break headlines, and the market can smell it even when employees pretend everything is fine. So when a rival firm reached out requesting a confidential meeting, I wasn't surprised. They didn't open with compliments or recruitment pitches. They opened with evidence, documents tracing partnerships Victoria had forced onto us, all funneled through shell corporations registered in jurisdictions where ethics go to die. They didn't accuse. They didn't speculate. They showed me signatures, timestamps, wire trails, and memorandums that aligned disturbingly well with the proof I had been collecting. They understood what most people refused to see. Our IPO wasn't an ascent. It was a loaded fuse. Their CEO leaned across the table and spoke the sentence that confirmed my suspicions. "You know this IPO will implode." It wasn't a question. It was a prognosis. They recognized the signs of a corporation hollowed out from the inside, preparing to disguise debt as growth and monarchy as governance. They weren't approaching me out of admiration. They were approaching me out of anticipation. They wanted to know whether I intended to survive the imminent collapse or be buried with it. I could have accepted their initial offer, an impressive salary, bonuses, access to teams that actually valued innovation. But I didn't want a job. I wanted leverage. I wanted protection from the very catastrophe they saw coming and from the individuals engineering it. So I negotiated something far more valuable than a paycheck, a guaranteed leadership position and a contingency infrastructure, an operational platform that would activate only if Clause 17.9 of our charter was triggered. It was an elegant trap. If the company continued its legal descent into hereditary chaos, the fallout would clear a path for me. If the board ignored compliance requirements, the clause would detonate automatically. And when it detonated, every fraudulent allocation tied to Victoria Hale's fictional capital would vaporize. The empire she thought she was cementing would collapse under its own paperwork. My exit strategy was never resignation. Resignation is surrender. Mine was precision. Mine was structure. Mine was timing. I didn't leave the company to escape its disaster. I prepared to be the one who survived the blast while everyone else pretended they couldn't hear the ticking. An IPO is supposed to be a coronation. A company dresses itself in numbers, projections, and promises, then steps onto the public stage to be judged. Cameras were positioned, speeches were polished, and the board rehearsed their scripted gratitude. The energy in the room felt choreographed, as if nothing could interrupt the momentum of a valuation that nearly touched $1 billion. But beneath the rehearsed smiles, I saw something else. Arrogance disguised as inevitability. Victoria Hale sat at the head of the table, adorned in jewels meant to signal power, unaware that the very law she ignored was about to be her undoing. The countdown to the opening bell began. Screens flickered with media coverage. Financial journalists waited eagerly to broadcast the rise of a company they believed represented ingenuity and disruption. What they didn't realize was that the disruption wasn't technological, it was legal. I watched the seconds tick down, my petition already prepared, the trigger waiting for a single digital submission. I didn't need applause. I needed timing. And timing, unlike legacy, never lies. At exactly 8:54 a.m., 6 minutes before the bell, I submitted the legal petition invoking Clause 17.9. It included everything: Victoria's unauthorized share accumulation, the missing capital input records, the falsified board approvals, the post-signature contract alterations, and the request she made to purge transactional evidence. The documents were airtight, time-stamped, cross-referenced, and notarized. They were more than accusations. They were proof. The Securities and Exchange Commission received the submission instantly. Their system flagged the violation as material fraud affecting shareholder legitimacy. Within seconds, alarms didn't just ring metaphorically. They appeared on monitors in the trading center. The broadcast cut from excited commentators to confusion. The ticker paused mid-motion. The bell that was meant to launch the company into the public markets never rang. The offering froze live on national television. Silence flooded the boardroom. Then chaos erupted. Reporters surged toward the glass wall, shouting questions no one had answers for. Phones rang like emergency sirens. Investors who once fought for allocation now demanded explanations. The market doesn't fear scandal. It fears uncertainty. And Clause 17.9 turned Victoria Hale from a figurehead into a financial hazard. Victoria attempted to stand. She opened her mouth to speak, to command, to reclaim control. But influence cannot survive legal exposure. Her voice trembled, stripped of the authority she once wielded without effort. Every word she tried to utter dissolved under the weight of the petition displayed on screens around the room. She didn't look like a matriarch anymore. She looked like someone who had mistaken sentiment for sovereignty. Her jewels didn't sparkle, they accused her. The board stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not as an untouchable benefactor, not as a guardian of legacy, but as a liability. Her presence no longer stabilized the narrative. It contaminated it. The image crafted for months, built on curated appearances and whispered approvals, shattered. Investors don't care about lineage. They care about legality. And nothing erodes confidence faster than the scent of fraud. Her son, my boss, sat frozen. His complexion had drained of color, leaving only the hollow outline of entitlement stripped of protection. His eyes locked onto mine, not with anger, but with comprehension. He finally understood the scale of his mistake. He hadn't built a dynasty. He had assembled a monument of paper and signatures, never realizing the foundation was dust. He had treated power as inheritance, forgetting that the market treats illegitimacy as contagion. News networks pivoted instantly. What had been marketed as a groundbreaking IPO became a cautionary tale broadcast across financial segments. Analysts dissected every decision, every unexplained promotion, every suspicious partnership. Reporters didn't talk about innovation anymore, they talked about dynasty, entitlement, and the rot that grows when governance becomes inheritance. Commentators compared the scandal to the worst collapses in corporate history. Investors who once fought for allocation now distanced themselves publicly, eager to show they were merely spectators, not accomplices. Victoria tried to exit gracefully, chin raised, expression controlled. But grace disappears when power does. Compliance officers didn't offer her a corridor of respect. They escorted her out like someone whose presence posed risk, not authority. She didn't leave as royalty. She left as a question. How had an entire company surrendered itself to someone who was never meant to sit at the table? The building felt lighter once they were gone. Not relieved, but exposed. The dynasty hadn't been dismantled. It had imploded. No missiles, no rebellion, no dramatic confrontations. Just truth, documented, time-stamped, undeniable. You don't destroy a kingdom by attacking the king. You destroy it by turning on the lights and revealing the throne was made of cardboard. And once the spotlight hits, cardboard doesn't burn. It disappears. People romanticize revenge as a heated outburst, a dramatic confrontation, a cathartic explosion of emotion. But those who have spent years navigating boardrooms know better. Revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't throw punches. It files forms, retrieves timestamps, cites clauses, and waits. Revenge is administrative. It is patient enough to let arrogance write its own obituary. Victoria Hale and her son didn't understand this. They believed legacy was something you could purchase, an asset you could inherit, like an estate or a last name. They treated leadership like a costume. Wear it long enough and people will believe you deserve the role. They thought titles created competence. They thought wealth insulated them from consequence. They mistook visibility for value. They forgot the one truth seasoned professionals never forget. Power isn't inherited. It's documented. Paperwork has no sympathy. Charters don't bend for charm. Governance doesn't kneel for diamonds. You can bully people, flatter investors, and manipulate narratives, but signatures and bylaws don't care how expensive your earrings are. The very systems Victoria underestimated became the instruments that dismantled her ambitions. Victoria tried to buy a legacy. I filed the paperwork that erased hers. That wasn't spite. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't even personal. It was structural. She walked into a corporation thinking she could rewrite rules through entitlement. I reminded her that rules exist precisely because of people like her. After the IPO freeze, the story spread across industries. Commentators didn't discuss the software that nearly changed the sector or the valuation that almost touched $1 billion. They dissected a single question. How did a woman with no qualifications almost crown herself queen of a public company? The answer was simple: neglect. Everyone was so distracted by the promise of profit that they didn't notice the machinery being rewired from accountability to inheritance. The board loved the illusion of stability. Investors loved the fantasy of meteoric growth. Employees tolerated dysfunction because ambition numbs discomfort. Victoria gambled on one universal corporate flaw: people don't read what they sign. I did. Clause 17.9 wasn't a weapon until she violated it. Documentation isn't dangerous until someone tries to erase it. She believed legacy was permanent because she had never encountered someone who understood the architecture of power better than she did. She mistook my silence for ignorance. She didn't realize I was studying every system she corrupted. The IPO never happened. No confetti, no bell, no triumphant headlines. Not because the company failed to innovate, but because someone tried to steal control without earning it. In the end, the market didn't punish a business model, it punished entitlement. Investors accept risk, volatility, and even temporary incompetence. What they don't tolerate is fraud. Victoria vanished from the conversation as swiftly as she had appeared. Her son discovered something far more painful than termination: irrelevance. Without his inherited authority, he had nothing to say and no one willing to listen. His downfall wasn't theatrical. It was humiliatingly quiet. No scandalous press conference, no courtroom outburst, just the slow, undeniable realization that he had never built anything capable of surviving scrutiny. My career, on the other hand, did not end with my departure. It began there. The rival firm honored every clause of the agreement we negotiated months earlier. I walked into an environment where competence wasn't a threat, it was currency. Where questions weren't punishable, they were necessary. Where ownership wasn't granted by bloodline, it was earned. The team I now led didn't follow me because of my title. They followed because I had done something corporate history rarely rewards. I had proven that governance can still defeat greed. People assume legacy is built by those who speak the loudest or command the most attention. They imagine power is forged through charisma, connections, or coercion. But the truth is far simpler. Power belongs to those who understand how systems think. A dynasty collapsed not because someone hated it, but because someone understood it. Victoria wasn't defeated by emotion, ambition, or even morality. She was defeated by the structure she ignored. She lost not because she was outmatched, but because she was undocumented. Her son once asked me, before everything unraveled, what separated leaders from employees. Now I have an answer. Leaders understand that authority without accountability is temporary. Employees who understand accountability eventually become the leaders. The company's fall wasn't a financial disaster. They survived the valuation loss, restructured, and rebuilt. The true cost was reputational. No investor, no analyst, no partner would ever forget the image of an IPO halted on live television because a ghost shareholder couldn't prove she existed. Sometimes, the most expensive fall in history isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in silence. The silence that follows when a dynasty realizes its foundation was paperwork it never bothered to read. The silence when a son recognizes that inheritance without merit is a spotlight without electricity. The silence when a woman who arrived adorned in diamonds leaves surrounded by auditors instead of admirers. Revenge ends when a person is punished. Justice ends when a system is corrected. What happened wasn't revenge. It was correction. Victoria tried to purchase immortality. I purchased a filing fee. And that ultimately was enough. Because money can buy lawyers, jewelry, influence, even silence. But it can't buy legitimacy. It can't purchase history. And it can't rewrite a charter written by someone who understands that real power isn't spoken. It's signed.